What does it mean to be a caregiver? An interview with Susan McLeod. My name is Bernadette Chevalier and I'm in the Faculty of Pharmacy and Pharmaceutical Sciences. Shortly I'll be speaking with Susan McLeod about her experience as her mother's caregiver. Susan is also an old friend and a professional colleague when we were both working in Halifax hospitals. Here's a little background about Susan. When Susan McLeod accompanied her 90-year-old mother through a labyrinth long-term care system, she found it was a 9-year journey navigating a government without heart in a system without compassion. Her mother was no picnic either. The final leg in that journey became Dying for Attention, a graphic memoir of nursing home care, a book defined by a self-effacing humor and a rueful look at all she learned. The book was published in October 2021 by Conundrum Press. In addition to creating the book, during a Master of Fine Arts in Creative Nonfiction program at the University of King's College in Halifax, Susan also holds a Bachelor of Fine Arts from NSCAD University. She spent her career in healthcare communications in both the government and non-profit sectors, including time spent promoting the Nova Scotia government's long-term care. And for this, she atones.
So what does it mean to be a caregiver?
So, well, it was all news to me when it started out. This is something I discovered by experience. My father died when he was 88 and she was 90, and they were quite independent. They were living in an independent apartments in a long-term care home, but that just meant they got housekeeping, foot care, a nurse was available, and they had a choice of some meal plan. So I didn't realize when my father was alive how I didn't see their decline, because when I went to visit them, everything was fine and they pretended like nothing was wrong. But it turns out when after my father died rather suddenly, that Mom had needed a lot of help getting in and out of the bathtub, and she didn't have dementia, but she was definitely frail, and she needed help going back and forth to the dining room, which I didn't realize. So I became my father almost, and it was quite a sudden transition. I used to have to go to her apartment before work and help her out of the tub, things like that. But she then went into assisted living, where there was more assistance and better designed bathrooms. Like there was a shower that she could walk in and out. So I guess the role of caregiver, it gradually increased, but it means once someone is frail and to certain degrees of incapacitation, you fill in those blanks, and it has to be done physically. There's no way around it. You can't do that by Zoom or, and also it became, as we went through increasing levels of care, it became navigating a very complex and difficult system in Nova Scotia anyway. And I think to some degree it's that way across Canada, because the Canada Health Act doesn't include long-term care. So in each province, it's been added on, but in piecemeal. So it's not even really a system, and funded according to the ability of each province. And Nova Scotia is a have-not province, so not well funded.
Well,
so does that answer the question? I also have.
It's really sort of a culmination, as it builds, and your responsibilities build over time as well, and that must be very difficult,
yes,
emotionally as well. I mean, just the physicality of it and being in the places when you need to be, but the toll it takes on you as a caregiver.
Yes, my mother and I weren't particularly close, and so I really did not want to become her caregiver. But it became apparent there was no choice. My sibling was in another part of Canada, and cousins were far away, and we weren't that kind of family anyway. We were never a very close family. So it became apparent it was going to fall on my shoulders. And eventually I did take early retirement because I couldn't manage I had a demanding deadline-oriented job in communications in healthcare, where you had to meet the deadline. So it wasn't possible for me to take afternoons off, and
Yeah.
accompany mom to doctor's appointments, like
Sure.
my father had. But I'm fortunate in that I had the ability to do so. And my husband had been encouraging me for a year or two, because he could see I was getting exhausted. And I was saying, no, I can't. It's hard to let go of a career, of a job that gives you meaning and is part of your identity. But it just became too much. So I did it. But at the same time, I was my mother's advocate, and I wanted to advocate on her behalf, because this is the end of her life. Yeah. She, she deserves the minimum of good care, at least.
Absolutely, yeah. And that's a great point that you bring up too. As a caregiver, you are an advocate for your loved one.
Mm-hmm.
Tell me more about your experience communicating and interacting with health professionals who were looking after your mother. Can you share some examples of what went well?
Yeah, well, overall, I guess it was frustrating, and there was a range. Now, the people who were good, I guess, they tended to be older, which is interesting. They tended to be people closer in age to me, and tended to have an understanding of perhaps what I was going through, and perhaps they had gone through something, or anyway, they had an empathy for my situation. And their characteristics of communicating was they would remember my name, they would smile at me, and they would try to be helpful to the extent that they could. And when they couldn't be helpful, they would, commiserate with me that the system didn't allow them to be as helpful as they wanted to be. Like we were both up against a brick wall, if you will.
You felt that they validated your concerns?
Yes, definitely. They validated my concerns. They got it, like they totally understood it. And they were friendly, there was an openness, there was a sense of welcoming when they saw me. And so I felt like we were on the same team.
Susan described a specific nurse, an LPN, who provided consistent, compassionate care to Susan and her mother.
This particular LPN that I'm thinking of, she'd been in the place a long time. She was near retirement, and she had a pretty stable shift. So I could count on her being there when I went. And she was on vacation when Mom died, but before she left, she made a point of saying, I know I might not see you again, and I just want to say how much I appreciate you were an engaged family. It was a pleasure to look after your mother when you were, involved. And she said, and here I'm going to arrange the furniture in your mother's room so that it's more comfortable for family members to sit with her as she's dying. And no one else had thought to do that. So she actually took a chair out of the staff room. I don't know what that meant for staff, but she made a place for more than one person to be next to the bed. And that was like such a generous and thoughtful thing to do.
It sounds like such a contrast between the different workers that you experienced, and it's so much compassion from the one LPN who went extra. Or
well, again, I felt like I was with her, not against her. I felt like I was walking by her side. I felt like when I had problems with the call bell, she would listen, and she said, "I'll talk to staff," and then I would come back and say, it's 2 weeks and the call bell still isn't. She said, I tell them and I tell them, and so I'll tell them again, but it was all, she can't control every shift. She's not there every shift. So I felt like she was, and she smiled and she knew my name, and we could have chats about other things, Christmas shopping or the weather.
So you built a rapport and a relationship with her, right?
Yeah.
Sounds like that was important to her as well.
Yeah, that's right. Yes, that's right. And she didn't seem to have any prejudice. Like, she didn't seem to have a preconceived idea about what a family member was going to be like or what an old person was going to be like. She simply saw the need to be caring in her capacity as LPN.
Susan also received kindness and compassion from a few other nurses that Susan and her mom knew. Susan received support and compassion from some nursing home staff after her mom died. But as Susan shared earlier, interacting with and communicating with health professionals as a caregiver was a mixture of both positive and negative experiences. Susan, can you give some examples of when communication didn't go so well with the health professionals looking after your mom?
And the characteristics of, I would say, bad or communications that left me feeling confused or less than or helpless were the ones where, I guess at the very worst, they dreaded me, like they did not want to see me. And I made a point of never being angry. I would try, because I understood, I worked in healthcare communications. I understood how overburdened the system is, and particularly people on the so-called front lines. I totally understood that. And I never came at them with a hatchet.
What was the impact of poor communication on you as the caregiver?
So, you could almost see them ducking when I came down. They didn't want to see me. When I would raise something, they would be defensive. So unlike the person who validated my experience and saying, yeah, I wish we did have more staff, or yeah, I don't know, I've been asking for that for years and it never happens. They were like, well, we didn't mean to, or whatever. Like, it was a different kind of response. And it made me feel bad, it made like I wanted to say, I'm not here to hurt you, it made me feel like I was some kind of monster.
We talk about with learners about listening carefully, like listening intently, like hearing, and how important it is to feel heard.
Exactly. And that's, I went through a lot of therapy writing this book, and the word that resonated with me was validation.
Both Susan and her mom were acutely aware of the staffing issues. Healthcare workers just didn't have enough time to pay attention to them.
I don't know, I didn't find them responsive to who she was. I had to pay for a visitor every other day so that she had someone there every second day. And again, we were very fortunate that we could afford that. And that visitor filled the gap that the nursing home didn't. That visitor was a consistent person who knew her name, always knew her name, grew to understand her likes and her dislikes, and to speak to her about those, and to understand what she wouldn't like in the dining room, or to understand what rec activities she would like, and what whereas the staff never knew her as a person. So how can it be your home?
Family meetings were held annually with health professionals. These meetings consisted of one-way communication where healthcare professionals presented short reports. There was no opportunity for Susan to ask questions, and there was no shared decision-making with Susan around her mom's care plan.
The nursing home would have annual family meetings with all the, so that would be the first time and the only time I would meet a pharmacist, a physiotherapist, an occupational therapist, the social worker, the head of nursing. Yeah. And so, not even someone on her floor. Those were like the heads of departments. And what would happen was they would give me a report, but they didn't want to hear from me. They would say, like the dietary person. So we noticed that Marjorie prefers this or has changed her diet. The pharmacy person was, who I only got to see at these meetings, that was a bit frustrating because I could never understand their language. So her dementia, her age-related dementia would increase, and they would say they changed. So I wouldn't hear from the pharmacist. I would hear from the PCW that they had upped her something or added something, but I had no idea what that meant, or, what, I just didn't know. But the PCW couldn't explain it to me because they didn't really know. They were just relating the information from a pharmacist who I imagined, along with those other heads of department, sat in an administrative wing somewhere, where they all had their offices. I don't know.
But with the caregiver, what's important to your mom? What would be important to your mom, and being part of just the decision-making process. But it doesn't sound like you were asked to be part of the decision-making process.
No, not really. And in order to communicate with them at this annual care meeting, I had to make them comfortable. I felt that in order for them to be honest with me, or to even not be so stiff in the meetings, I had to make jokes, or I had to bring cookies, or I had to do something to ease the tension in that care room, because it was obviously, it seemed obvious to me that this was a dreaded time of year for them to meet with family members. And again, I think it's because there's so much beyond their control.
As her mother's caregiver, Susan experienced a lack of empathy and compassion around the time her mom was dying.
That example in the book when mom seemed to be declining fairly quickly when she was dying, and I knew better than to ask, but somehow I said, I still said, can you give me a time frame? Is this weeks? Is this months? And she just rolled her eyes and said, families always ask this. No, we don't know.
The nursing home staff had inconsistent shifts, which made it difficult for both the residents and the caregivers to get to know the staff. Inconsistent shifts got in the way of developing relationships with staff. Some staff who didn't know Susan were less connected and less empathetic. These inconsistent shifts were a particular problem in the summer, when Susan's mother was declining and died.
The rest of the time, there was an ever-revolving continuing care workers who had different shifts on different floors at different times.
As a caregiver, did you feel like you were part of a team, that providing care?
Well, only with this one LPN. She made me feel like a team. And I think, as I was saying to you earlier, they talk about patient-centered care, but in long-term care, with the residents having little, deaf or having vision problems or communications problem, the family is an extension of that person, is almost, joined at the hip. And so is the person providing the direct hands-on care, the personal care worker. And I could see they were under such stress. They didn't have enough of them. So if the people closest to the patient are not also included and cared for, then the patient is not cared for.
From the pharmacy perspective, like I'm just trying to think about, what recommendations would you have about pharmacy staff maybe to communicate more effectively with caregivers? Do you think, that would you have appreciated a direct call or an update, an actual personal type of a call?
Well, I think they could do away with that team meeting where everybody meets once a year, everybody, I don't think that's productive. And maybe it would be harder on each individual staff, but if someone said, you usually come in on Wednesday afternoon, could you pop up to my office and we'll discuss your mother's care? And, and that could have happened with the pharmacist, with the physiotherapist, with the social worker, whatever. I was often in the social worker's office about the call bell or about whatever, but so she probably saw too much of me, but the rest I never saw, aside from this one meeting. And, and just again, to feel like she was focused on me and Mom, and certainly Mom could have come to those meetings.
Thank you so much, Susan, for sharing your experience of being a caregiver.